Okay, you can hear me, right? Yeah, and also remember, we are all supposed to keep our cameras on. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. I think it's 2 o'clock. So what I am planning to do today, the agenda is first we'll have some discussion that you can initiate, you will initiate based on the readings as well as the class one, the first class discussion that we had, I mean, the presentation that I made. And there is a whole bunch of discussion that, I mean, there's some questions at least that were asked on the Piazza, and I answered some, but you can bring them up. Um, and then I'm going to actually spend the later part giving kind of a semi-technical overview of essentially the first 2 chapters of Intro to AI textbook. Okay, so if you were to take a 471 class, then you would get an introduction to AI. And I sort of want to give that to you basically because without that, you will ask yourself questions like some of you are asking, which is what's the difference between AI and ML? Okay, that's sort of asking what's the difference between hand and a person. Okay, or like basically it's just they're all connected. Machine learning winds up being part of AI. So I want to kind of explain that cannot be explained just at the high level. So I want to kind of provide some technical overview, and then you will go from there. And then you can, if you still have questions on that, then we can talk about those. So that's basically what I'm trying to do. So there's the first part on the discussion, and then the second on the overview that I will do. Okay. So any questions? Actually, for right now, just unmute yourself because this is supposed to be a discussion. I mean, unless you have some vacuum cleaner going on behind you or something, just unmute yourself. And then that way I don't need to mute or unmute, etc. Okay. Yeah. So I think a couple of you actually even said, we wish there was more discussion. So this is your chance. I mean, this is supposed to be a seminar. I understand the first class, it's very hard to have questions without even knowing what we're going to be talking about. But now you have talked a little about it, but then hopefully you'll have some questions and then we can talk about other things. Yes, go ahead, Joshua.
So last class we talked about like the different types of intelligence, and I wrote a comment about what it would look like for AI to have emotional intelligence and how much they display that, because it seems like perhaps maybe they've skipped over emotional intelligence a little bit. And so maybe
who skipped over? I mean,
like AI, just like in how it's progressed.
So, yeah, there's a whole entire, I mean, that's actually emotional. Again, so it's a very strange situation. On one hand, so this is, by the way, the reason why you people don't get too many STEM seminars in the Barrett College, right? Because everybody has an opinion on, life, philosophy, etc. So we could have like a freshman seminar where everybody can answer any of these questions. But once you get to things, little, like more of the STEM sort of things, even though this is not exactly databases, some of the questions that you raise, probably I will only be able to answer. But if anybody wants to say something, you're welcome to say too. I'm trying to make try to figure out how to actually make this not just me talking, but for example, that question, I think obviously I would have a better idea as to how to answer. The sense, the idea there has been that in general, social intelligence is not something that AI systems focused on a lot about. And in fact, social intelligence is not really needed for AI systems unless they have to work with us. Okay. And in fact, that is actually the same situation with respect to emotional intelligence. It's a The jury is like completely out on whether emotions that we have but we can't switch off um, are actually a net plus or a net minus. Nobody really knows. We just evolved with the emotions. Um, and in fact, there have been interesting studies showing that unemotional people, there's another way of saying you're not emotional is to say you're a sociopath. And so if you are feeling like putting somebody down, saying you're being too emotional, imagine them putting you down saying you're a sociopath, because sociopaths don't have emotions, it turns out. And the interesting question is people have tried to study whether in fact emotions help performance or not. And there are some studies showing that in fact our emotions do help our performance in the world, the way we work in the world. But it's not completely clear whether or not an artificial agent needs emotions or not. Artificial agent which shows intelligence needs emotions or not. That is not clear. However, if that artificial agent has to work with us, if it doesn't have social intelligence, if it doesn't have emotional intelligence, basically we are not going to use it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Any assistive system, if it's trying to help you when you make mistakes, etc., if it has this sneering voice, or it sort of laughs, or it does this deadpan, this basically enunciation of whatever it is saying, you get sick of it. People actually have shown this. You guys are too young. Do you guys remember Microsoft Paper? Have you heard of Microsoft Paperclip?
Yeah.
Right? So Microsoft Paperclip is this thing which, in this is of course PowerPoint. So the PowerPoint will have Microsoft Paperclip agent, which was trying to help you whenever you are making mistakes, etc. This was back in 97 timeframe. They did great um, work in that. But the problem, of course, that was that essentially it did not. I think I may have mentioned this last class if I don't quite remember. It basically, when it was retired from service, essentially everybody clapped. When basically Microsoft abandoned that project, and the reason was people hated it. People hated it. Part of it is because, as this researcher called Rosalind Picard, I think Rosalind Picard. She does work in effective computing. By the way, that's the buzzword, effective, with A, not E. Effective computing is emotional computing, computing with proper affect shown, okay? And that's very important when systems work with humans in the loop. And Rosalind Picard actually points out that at least part of the reason why people couldn't stand Microsoft Paperclip was because it always had this smug look on its face. And when does it come up? It comes up because you're stuck. You've got stuck in Microsoft Office products. And if your friend comes to help you when you're stuck and the friend has a smug look, you feel like punching the friend rather than taking the help. Okay. So again, why do we do this? Why can't we think about the longer term? Well, we are what we are. We basically have evolved not to be able to switch off emotions. It's not that easy to switch off emotions for us. And we basically will look at the world through as if we are interacting with other humans. So from that perspective, in fact, emotional intelligence and social intelligence in general is extremely important for AI systems if they are working with humans in the loop. And in fact, I apologize partly because I've been giving in addition to talking to you last Friday, in between I gave like 3 or 4 other talks. So if I said something that I'm repeating, remind me, that it is possible that, I may have mentioned some of this stuff. But so I wind up working actually in my research area is human aware AI systems. And that's basically more closer to social intelligence. And for that, in general, you'll wind up needing um, mental modeling ability. Okay. Um, you guys, whenever you're talking to each other, when you're listening to me, etc., you always wind up modeling each other's. We model each other's uh, current beliefs, current views of the world, and so on, so that we can then actually do a proper interaction with each other. Okay. Um, and that winds up becoming very important. So emotions are just like the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot more. In general, you need to be able to recognize that there is, if there are humans in the environment, there is, you need to actually model their mental states. And much of, I think as again, I'm sorry if I already mentioned this, but did I mention that we have too big a brain for what we do normally? I don't know whether, did I mention that whole thing about so that's basically we strategize about each other's mental models. And that's one of the reasons why we may have needed, evolutionarily the kinds of brains we have. So emotions are connected to social intelligence. And from that perspective, AI systems are going to spend more time on that in as much as they're going to actually work with humans in the loop. Um, did that answer your question, whoever asked that question? I think
Yeah,
this, okay.
thank you.
Okay, good. You guys keep shifting whenever somebody comes in and somebody goes out, etc. So unlike a physical classroom, the places just keep shifting. So I don't know where to look anymore. In fact, I was looking at Gordon for some reason, because I think when you asked the question, Joshua, you are in where Gordon was in on my screen. So I'm looking at him straight and I'm saying, how come this guy is not paying attention? I'm answering his question, but you are here. Okay, that's okay. Any other questions? Anything else? Yes, go ahead, Kavya.
So actually kind of going off of the topic of emotional intelligence. So for me, kind of how I see it applying to like our lives is like in mental health industry. So how do you think that that would apply to that, and how long do you think it'll be before AI is like?
I think, yeah, that's a very good question. So at some point of time, we can talk more about that, but in general, I think you were the one, or somebody asked this on Piazza about this, and I mentioned the fact that, the history's earliest chatbots essentially were trying to be psychoanalysts. Part of the problem is that mental health is something that for which we don't have a clear-cut idea about how to diagnose as well as how to treat.
Right.
And so we basically just sort of, because we are completely clueless about it, we just try to, as many of you know, a huge amount of people who are in a part of the homeless population are essentially have mental illnesses. And because as a society here as well as anywhere else, we have no clue how to handle mental health issues, we basically just let them drop off and fall off the safety nets. Okay, so it's a huge issue. In terms of AI helping with that, there are of course all sorts of ethical issues involved. First of all, from a research perspective, we don't yet know how to correctly assess mental states. How to make AI systems correctly assess mental states of people they are talking to. Do you understand what I'm saying? So what they will wind up doing most of the time is pattern matching. Okay, so these, in fact, that was what wound up happening in the very beginnings with Eliza. It just did a pattern matching thing, and it would basically know that when our conversation is flagging, if you say, so you didn't like your parents, and that's always a great way to continue the conversation because nobody apparently likes their parents. Or they did, in which case, that will also be a way to, continue going with the conversation. So this is what, but then the question, of course, is that's clearly a very syntactic way to do mental health advising. We have come much further by the time now we have these systems like OBOT, which, it's a project, I think, which is actually a company, startup company, and there's a bunch of others. I mean, I remember OBOT for some reason, but you can have conversations with these agents on like your cell phones, etc. Okay. So that's already out there right now. The real question is how to make these things, and how do we make sure that we are doing something ethical in terms of, so again, the idea is if a medical doctor doesn't nominate, there's a whole entire cottage industry. I think after lawyers, psychiatrists are the ones that people tell jokes about because we don't quite know how to do psychiatry to some extent. It's not exactly like there is it's not a hard science in the sense of, and it's not like they're actually poking into your brain and saying, yeah, I noticed that neuron number 75 and neuron number 755 are having some, misfiring issues. So you are essentially doing the whole thing at a macro level. So we don't know what the human doctors do, but at least they have taken Hippocratic oath, they can be sued, etc. What if these, machines essentially, in what are the guarantees we have with the, machines actually providing mental health advice? When we know for sure that the programs clearly don't seem to have that much of an idea about being human. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's like a tricky issue, but it will not stop the area. I'm sure people are going to continue trying to make, there are some advantages because it's scalable. Everybody can get mental health advice versus only people who can afford psychiatrists or have time to go at a particular time and then get counseling. Okay, but on the other hand, it's harder to put quality controls. So it becomes a little trickier. The current state of art essentially is that's where it is right now. We don't have, in general, how do you, the way psychiatrists basically assess your mental state is by open-ended conversation.
Right.
Do you mind if I jump in, Professor?
What? I'm sorry, go ahead, please, go ahead.
Okay. I was thinking that there's like layers to mental health. So I'd imagine if it's like what you're calling for, because there is like a physical aspect of like, make sure you're getting good sleep, make sure you're eating well. And so for that, if you're looking for like, I want to do something because I'm feeling down or depressed, you could have like a bot go through steps and basically give you like what to do and what's scientifically proven, which is like exercise, sleep, and eating right. Whereas I think it'd be trickier to have people who want to be heard. Just like, are they truly going to be heard if they know it's a bot? And like, I don't believe we should be tricking people, being like, oh yeah, this is a person, and then there could be grave consequences for, just, I guess, reinforcing that feeling of being alone or isolated.
I agree, but since I said that, since you agreed with me, I want to give you an opposite view of what I just said, which is basically, in fact, by the way, I should mention at some point of time that my favorite quote is of what would be a seminar is not to make up your mind, but to open it, to make the agony of decision making so intense that you can escape only by thinking. This was actually the tagline for Columbia School of Journalism seminars, which I just love. So I don't believe that for some of these issues, there are any pat answers. They are both sides, and partly we should just get exposed to it and then think about it. Some of the other technical issues, there may be more narrower set of answers, and then we don't need to think of it as a whole world of possibilities. So with respect to this point about whether or not people want to be seen by a real human or not, there are actually studies that were done. I believe this was at USC ICT's Institute for Creative Technologies, where they had soldiers with post-traumatic stress disorders, okay, who need obviously mental health counseling. They found that the soldiers were more willing to pour their hearts out if they thought they were talking to a machine rather than to a human. I mean, we have this. I mean, you guys know this, that if we know somebody, we are a lot more careful. I mean, there's like if you know them very closely, it's one thing, but if you just know them, if you're familiar with them, you don't want to pour your hearts out. But on the other hand, you're sitting on this, long flight next to some crazy stranger, and you have nothing to do, so you just pour your heart out. You'll tell your entire life story, hoping that they won't be getting down and staying very close to your neighborhood. Okay, so that sort of a thing is also there. And so in fact, people have found that sometimes if you don't even, so imagine a soldier having a counseling session with a human doctor, but they are completely bottled up what they wanted to say. It's a real human doctor, they can help them, but they completely bottled up. Okay, versus they're pouring their hearts out to this machine, which may actually not be anywhere near as competent as a human doctor, but at least it has more information. Okay, so it becomes, bad psychiatrist working with more information versus great psychiatrist working with no information. And all of a sudden, it's no longer as clear cut as to what is the right way for progress in those cases.
Can I hop in on?
Please.
Okay. I'm in a public place. Sorry, someone is like moving with like wheels. But with like Catherine's point, there is a company called Able2, and like I also know about Wobot, but with like Able2, they do the component of like telehealth, like mental health care, and the integration of like the chatbot, and the chatbot makes like more wellness based like recommendations. And I think because the company integrates like the human component and the AI bot, it makes the individual more receptive to receiving those like wellness like recommendations of like, oh, meditation or sleeping at better times. And also with your point of like people do love to spill out their hearts on the internet. Like if you look at like Reddit, if you look at Twitter, Tumblr, like people love to expose their like insecurities online because there's that component of like no one actually knows you, but you could like find that community. And if people are able to trust like this robot because they know there's no judgment, it's like another factor as to why they're able to like pour their hearts out.
Yeah, by the way, so I didn't quite, I guess whoever spoke now, I couldn't see the name. Who spoke just now?
Oh, me. Vasiliki.
Oh, okay,
Vasiliki.
Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't quite tell who was speaking. I don't know why. Okay, but yeah, I think it all of that makes clear sense. In terms of two issues there, one of course is you could put AI healthcare. I mean, we're talking about mental health, but AI applications in health are numerous too. All of health, not just mental health. Okay. And many of these are what the discussion that we're doing for mental health is just a surrogate for all of those discussions too. Mental health is even more complex, but it's like if a machine basically just decides you have like a particular disease and you need this particular treatment, then what exactly is who are you going to sue if in fact the machine winds up being wrong, for example, and how are you going to trust the machine? And one simple idea, of course, is put machines in a triaging situation where they kind of triage for the human doctors. So they will be able to at least put you in bins, saying who should be seen faster, who should be seen, who could be seen after 6 months or something. And so that kind of cuts down the risk. That is that's a human machine combined system. The other thing is the whole social media aspect is actually, I mean, I had a student who's in papers on this, basically scouring social media, especially some sub groups in Instagram or Twitter, not so much, I guess. You could actually try to do, people do basically expose their insecurities or their self-harm tendencies, etc., etc. Sometimes when they know that they are anonymous and they don't know who else they're talking to, etc. That is not going to be particularly helpful if you don't know who they are. You're not going to be able to treat them. But I guess social media analysis has been seen as an additional tool in public health monitoring. Okay, and then so that's sort of a thing. And so when in analyzing the social media, you typically use techniques that have been connected to data science and AI, and so that's another way AI techniques will wind up being used in the context of public health. Tons of papers on this actually that people have written. But again, just to tell you, I mean, there was this one particular paper that my student had exactly on this. And in the last minute, I basically withdrew from that paper because one of the issues in doing this kind of research is that computer scientists are suddenly becoming experts in everything. Okay, just because you're able to look at the data and do some random data analysis, we are also psychiatrists, we are also public health officials, we are also X and Y. And there is this issue of if you can do this in real collaboration with experts in the field, that's one thing. Otherwise, it's a worrisome scenario. And that's something that you do want to keep in mind. Other comments, questions?
Yeah, I was sort of wondering, because I know that we mentioned at the start that we're really trying to focus on what AI needs, like the emotional intelligence and all that stuff. And so I was kind of wondering, like, does it necessarily need that like emotional intelligence in order to work with us? Because I know like right now we are working just fine with like our Alexas, Siris, anything like that, that don't necessarily have that like emotional intelligence, as well as like even with working with other people. Yes, there is like some sort of like emotional, but we can still characterize that and shift it a little bit depending on everyone else, like shift our own. So I didn't know, like, especially with machines, because everyone's can also have that public misconception of like, oh, if we give the machines emotions and all that stuff, then all of a sudden they're going to be going after us and all that stuff. So that's a bad thing. And also we can like shift it around them. So
that's a very interesting direction that opens the whole entire issues. But that's basically crippling machine intelligence because you're worried about controlling it. This kind of gets back to some of the other discussions that people are bringing up on safety issues with respect to AI and so on. So we want to do this. So issue, I mean, ultimately, it's not so much that people are getting by without machines having certain aspects of intelligence, that you can actually just extrapolate and say people can get by with no machines. Like people don't need any machines. It's just a question of, and then the other very interesting thing is people are extremely adaptive. So in fact, again, I don't know whether you read this. I mean, you have to read this. I'm going to say yes. The one that I asked you to read for today's class. We have made an entire, lifetime of career of going into machine land. Okay, in the sense that typing is not natural. We made it natural to ourselves. Writing is natural. You guys no longer think writing is natural because you no longer write it. and you think typing is better. Do you see what I'm saying? So a whole bunch of things, we are so adaptive that we will eventually, if in fact they were to tell you that there is, Android or iPhone recognizes your voice well, if you speak in like Captain Picard voice, all of you will train yourself just to sound like that. Do you see what I'm saying? But it seems to me like that's not the issue. It's like you want to, so the reason you're not doing these additional intelligences for the human level intelligence for the machines is probably because you're afraid of the safety issues rather than because are they really needed. In fact, nothing is really needed. You don't need intelligent machines to begin with. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's another way of looking at it. And from a safety perspective, it is a legitimate point. Okay. And in fact, at some point of time, I think I will give you this talk on the, human aware AI stuff, which is my actual research area. And, the problem is, if you do mental models, if you do mental modeling of the people in the loop, then you can tell them lies. Lying is completely because you realize that people don't know what you know, right? I mean, I don't know if I mentioned last week of Salian experiment. Did I mention Salian experiment? I'm sorry to sound like this. It's like I'm supposedly in a conference this week, which has been going on the whole week, except I'm sitting right here and looking at a different set of faces. And just before that, I gave some other talk. So, it's becoming harder to remember which is which anymore.
Hey, you're good. I don't think you did mention that before.
Okay, good. So Salian test is very useful, right? So Salian test is the following. Sally comes into the room. There is a ball there. She puts the ball in the red box, goes out of the room. Okay. Then Anne comes into the room, opens the red box, sees there's a ball, puts the box in the yellow box, puts the ball in the yellow box, and goes out of the room. Now Sally is coming back into the room. I'm asking you guys, you are the third party oracles. Where do you think Sally will look for the ball?
Red box.
Red box.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, if you thought this is like a GRE level question, then you are having trouble reasoning about mental models. In fact, the point is, the joke is that until about year 3, kids basically assume that the Sally will look for the ball in the yellow box because they saw that Anne put the ball in the yellow box. If they know it, then Sally should know it too. Do you understand what I'm saying? So in fact, there is this other theory saying that when infants come into the world, they think that they are connected to the entire universe, as if it's some kind of a kumbaya situation. Okay. And it takes them a while to figure out. It's hard. These are all theories. It's a while to figure out that they are an independent entity, not completely physically connected to the rest of the world. They figure that out, but it takes them longer to figure out that their mind is not the same as other people's minds. Do you see what I'm saying? So they assume if I know it, then you should know it too. And so the kid basically sees, I saw Anne put the ball in the yellow box. Okay, so everybody knows. I know that's in the yellow box. So everybody knows it's in the yellow box. Which is the reason why little kids don't know how to lie. Which is the reason why at some point of time they figure out that what they know is not known to others. And so YouTube is full of these 2-year, 3-year-olds who just figured out how to lie. And it's hilarious. Do you see what I'm saying? And in fact, when I give this talk, I tell people that, which is true, that when my son started telling lies, I was ecstatic because I knew that he has a working brain. You understand what I'm saying? If basically, I don't know if you guys realize this, autistic people, the difference between autistic and like non-autistic, of course, the whole spectrum, it's not a binary thing. One huge point is people on the autism spectrum have trouble making mental models. Okay, they also have trouble reading faces. That's basically, it's the social intelligence part, which basically they are missing. Okay, and so in some sense, the salient thing essentially tells you that the mental modeling abilities are quite important in having this sort of social intelligence skills. And so the issue, of course, is once you have mental models, you can use it to help each other. Because if you have a secretary who can't read your mind, it's not a very useful secretary to have. He or she is not a very useful secretary to have. You understand what I'm saying? The best secretaries, best helpers read what it is that we might be thinking of, what we might be needing, and almost sort of wordlessly provide assistance and so on. Okay, so they need to mental model you. Cooperation requires mental modeling. But once you have mental modeling, you can tell lies. So now coming back to Gordon's point, should we also stop machines from having mental models of the people that they are interacting with? Because if they do it, then they can tell lies. So in general, the usual problem is all technology is dual use. Okay, and intelligence is the ultimate technology. So intelligence is the ultimate dual use technology. It can be misused, it can be used for good. Okay, so in general, scuttling, crippling directions, at least in the research level, it almost never helps. And in the product level also, it's a questionable thing in terms of whether we should just scuttle certain directions because they can be misused.
So what would be, oh wait, sorry. What would be an example of like a machine with a mental modeling ability?
I mean, all assistants, I mean, the good assistants, again, that's something that's still more of a research area right now, human, machines that have ability to read your mental states. Right now, with Alexas in your home, every conversation with Alexa is like a new conversation. It doesn't really keep track of, this is not the way you talk to people in general. Okay.
Yeah.
So the more they basically are able to keep track of your preferences, the more they're able to keep track of what you might be currently trying to do, etc., then you will wind up having that sort of a cooperation ability.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, also, because I know there's like some concerns, especially with like, just for an example with Alexa, like privacy concerns about, like Google or Amazon, like taking too much information about what people are saying when, like, especially with the machines that can hear you and communicate with you. So do these privacy concerns also stop these machines from being able to mental model, since they like, people don't really like them recording them and keeping all the data of the things they've said?
So the last part I didn't get. So the privacy concerns, I mean, I lost, you said something at the very end.
Well, essentially because like as we were just saying, like a great secretary is able to, like, Alexa basically has to start out over every single time that there's a conversation. But if they were able to actually like keep the data on what you've said before, would that make them better at mental modeling and like predicting what you need and things like that?
Not just data, but also keeping track, using that data correctly, yes. And that at the same time does certainly bring up privacy considerations. Certainly. In fact, there is the same student who was working on the mental health issues and trying to help with mental health issues using Instagram, images and so on, public health level. She also did this work. She's actually a faculty member right now at Rensselaer Polytechnic. Lydia is her name. I'll send you those links, especially if you remind me. But we did this, she and another undergrad student, actually, she's a grad student, and an undergrad student, did this experiment when, I don't know, you are, obviously many of you are just first year here. Couple of years back, 2-3 years back, ASU suddenly decided to put Alexa dots in Tucker House. Tucker House is, I believe, the STEM hall, right? The places where all the engineering dweebs are supposed to be staying. And they put this Alexa dots. They just put it, okay? And there was actually a hue and cry. There was like, a public, there was like, I think, articles in papers, etc., saying, did ASU take people's permission to actually put these Alexa dots? And where is this data going? Is Jeff Bezos going to know what the students are eating for lunch and dinner, etc.? All sorts of issues, right? And so actually, Lydia and this other student actually did a study, by actually interviewing people in Tucker House. I should send you the thing. One of the tricky parts is all around this privacy issue, there is a huge chasm between old folks like me and people like you. Okay, because your generation, maybe not you, your generation has basically grown up with social media. And so, first of all, you have a better sense of what to share, what not to share, and B, you're not as worried about privacy, not you specifically, but the current generation is not as worried apparently about privacy issues as the newspaper folks who write the articles about privacy issues related to use of these Alexa things. So in fact, in the study, the Tucker House folks, many of them were not at all worried. Why do we care? It doesn't matter. Do you see what I'm saying? And it's the same issue. In fact, somebody else was asking, what happens to the human contact, when AI systems get all over the place, et cetera, et cetera. This too is, as to the level of concern about that problem, it depends on which generation people are talking about. See, I started with a punched card computer at its end. I didn't invent one of them, but I started with punched card computers in the at the end of their lives, and then I was extremely happy to have a bitmap terminal to do the thing that I showed you in the beginning of last class about my speech recognition thesis at IIT Madras. One of the greatest things is I had a terminal access to a prime computer, prime operating system computer. I was like extremely lucky for that. And then, then there was a line printer. I was able to print a few things. That's where I came from, right? And so there is a difference between that generation of people, some of who cannot actually control themselves once they fall on Twitter. Like I'm probably an example myself, okay? Because it's like a whole entire, like suddenly, it's sort of, you are not used to know how to control social media use. Whereas people who have came up during the explosion of social media have a slightly better control over it. At least they have a different problem with it. So in some sense, that is an entirely other issue that becomes important. If we can decide it's a problem, we will solve it. But you can also say we can actually figure out who thinks it is a problem. And if they don't think it's a problem, then you don't have to solve it. And so that sort of becomes an issue with respect to this whole Alexa privacy stuff, etc. Because some people don't seem to care. And they seem to be younger people because they've gotten used to it. And it's like, I think many of you, there was this general worry, right? Every generation thinks that the next generation is completely gone case. They are basically have such bad influences surrounding that definitely they're going to die. Basically unsuccessful in their lives, not die, unsuccessful in their lives. But every generation seems to do fine. It's partly because we are adaptive, and then so that is a whole entire issue. Somebody actually talked about this on the piazza, and I mentioned Sherry Turkle's work. But Sherry Turkle is my age, okay? And so it's not completely clear to me. She has studied, she has obviously thought about this problem a lot more than other people. But as to what actually happens, whether, what is lost when people have ability to, I mean, they don't need to meet with people face to face. Is that the end of the world? In fact, before March, that was the problem, right? Only young people apparently no longer were even interested in driving because they'll just get on social media and talk to each other. And we were worried as to whether this whole generation is going to have major problems because they don't know how to deal with flesh and blood people. But now we are all in the same situation. I'm looking at you. I'm an old guy. I'm looking at all of you guys in these little squares. And, in some weird ways, I don't find it that hard. I mean, especially except for the people who don't have their cameras on, it's completely fine. At some level, we get used to it, partly because we have this ability to adapt. And so we may be sometimes overestimating the problems, sometimes underestimating too. Those cases. Anything else? Okay, so let me actually try to do in the rest of our meeting, I'll try to get you to look at, as I said, sort of a semi-formal introduction to AI, which sort of should remove some of the questions like what's the difference between AI and ML? Do you see what I'm saying? And also get a sense of what makes things hard versus easy. So imagine the kind of discussion we had about AI up until now and as of last week and until whatever you have been thinking of is like having a discussion about math at the level of innumeracy kind of a book. That is math not good? Is math good kind of a thing? Versus most of you actually know some parts of actual math. And you can have a little more nuanced discussion. I'm not going to be able to do intro to AI to you, but I want to get you to at least a difference between people who talk about math but don't even know addition versus people who talk about math and know addition and at least algebra is quite different. Do you see what I'm saying? They may still not know calculus, but at least you know algebra. You understand the notions of abstraction. You understand that X can stand for something. A lot of people who try to learn algebra, not the way you probably learn in school, later on in the life, if they try to learn, they have a hard time making sense of this business that X can be anything. That's the conceptual leap that we have done. I mean, I'm assuming all of you have done, because you got into the college. And, we can have a different level of discussion about math than isn't math good versus bad. I think that part is needed too, because there are certain aspects of AI that, especially the social impacts, that there are no pat answers. That's what we're discussing. But I want to get, at least in terms of the content of AI, I want to go one level deeper, like first class level deeper. First of intro to AI level class deeper. So let me go quickly on this and then stop me as you want additional clarifications. So I actually talked two definitions last time in the class. One is like intelligent agent. The other is the circular definition for AI. Circular definition is intelligence is what intelligence does. The other one was the point of AI is to develop intelligent agents, right? So the question then is, this is basically what, if you were to do intro to AI textbook, this is a reasonably well understood, well accepted definitions, which is basically to say that AI, people can come to it from 4 different directions, at least. And actually, interestingly enough, because you guys are a interdisciplinary crowd, not all of you are computer science people, because you're from different areas. So you might actually have come to AI thinking of it, one of these 4, not any one specific one that the textbook uses. So you may be interested in AI because you want to develop systems that think like humans. You might be interested in AI because you want to help systems, make systems that act like humans, think like humans, act like humans. You might be interested in getting systems that think rationally, forget about humans. What is the right way to think? And humans are trying to approximate that way. They fail, but that's why, in fact, you all know, by the way, that we are all highly rational, right? we are all basically, I mean, it's amazing how far we came with our known irrationalities. In fact, we are predictably irrational. How predictable? Suppose you are being offered insurance one, you're about to take a flight. I mean, you haven't taken flights, for quite a long time. We are all stuck at homes. You're taking a flight and last minute, I'm going to sell you insurance. People do this actually. And insurance one basically says, this is insurance to take care of any untoward events that can happen. Okay, insurance against any untoward events. Insurance 2 says this is insurance against terrorist attacks. Okay, what do you think people buy of those bozos who actually buy insurance before getting into the flight? There are not that many left anymore because they'll say my credit card covers it. But if people are buying it, which one do you think people buy? Which one do you think you will buy? What?
The first one.
First one. How many people would say first one? Okay. How many people will say second one? How many people think? So the majority of people go for the second one, the terrorist events. Even though the mathematician in you, the rational person in you realizes that's nonsensical. It's like a whole person is being sold for $10. The hand is also being sold for $10. Why would I buy the hand if I can buy the whole person and remove the person and keep the hand? I'm sorry, I'm getting into bad mental images. But in general, why would I pay same money for the smaller thing? And yet everybody does it. How much more worse is that? How many of you have seen the movie Schindler's List? Okay, remember the girl in the pink gown? That's this beautiful scene. Basic idea is that Schindler's List is about Holocaust, right? And human mind is not very good at dealing with statistics. They deal with visceral specifics. This is the reason why everything insurance is not as interesting as terrorist insurance, even though terrorist insurance is just a subset of everything. Do you understand what I'm saying? And similarly, this is known. We have this problem in general, as we have evolved to fall for the specific rather than look at the abstract and general. And so, in fact, in the famous scene in Schindler's List, basically, all these Jews were being hounded away in the streets of Warsaw. And, you look at lots of people are going. And then what Steven Spielberg does is he puts this is black and white movie, by the way, just so that you realize, those of you who haven't seen. He puts this one girl in pink dress. So now you're focusing on that girl. It's very hard to make sense of all these people being hounded away. It's easier to focus on that one girl and see how she's being treated while this whole thing is going on, right? Which is unfortunately why people say things like, what's that? One death is a tragedy, 1 million deaths is a statistic. That, if that is not human irrationality, I don't know what is. Okay, and in fact, there's a beautiful variation of it which Oscar Wilde said that a mark of learning is to be moved by statistics. You understand what I'm saying? So you are a product of evolution. Most of what you are evolved when you had to run away from tigers and lions. That's it. Okay, because in the time of evolution, the scale of evolution, the math, the abstract thinking, it was just very, very late in the evolution. Most of what we are is running away from tigers and lions, etc. But we got this abstract thinking somehow, but our older brain still basically makes us behave very irrationally with respect to this abstract thinking. Okay. And so we don't actually take statistics seriously. We take specifics seriously. You saw debate. We all feel good if the politicians talk about one single person dying as against 200,000 people dying. Because 200,000 is just a number. If you show a person and, this person is my friend, blah, 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 then suddenly we fall for that lot more. And so Oscar Wilde essentially would say that a mark of education is to be moved by statistics. Okay, keep that in the back of your mind. Now, all of that is to say that think like humans is different from thinking rationally. I hope you never really needed this much, reason to believe that humans are not rational, but, if not, I gave you some, okay? In fact, I mentioned the thinking fast, thinking slow last week of Kahneman and Tversky. Those guys are extremely famous for looking at a whole set of things called cognitive biases that we have. Okay, and the cognitive biases essentially are things like if you already believe in something, if I tell you that thing is true, then you're more likely to believe the news story. So if you are a liberal, then you're more likely to believe a news story which says conservatives are monsters. And if you're a conservative, you're more likely to believe a news story which says liberals are monsters. You see what I'm saying? So these are all cognitive biases. And they talk about this, and we know that people have this problem. So if you want the systems to behave think rationally, that's a different thing. And then you can also talk about systems that act like humans. Who cares about thinking? They just act. Finally, what matters is actions, and systems that act rationally. Okay, these are 4 different ways that you can get interested in something connected to AI. It turns out that of these, 3 of them are areas other than AI. That's why some of you think of things like cognitive science, for example, is one of the thinking like humans. Okay, but let's talk about it. So acting humanly, I don't want to go into too much detail, but last time I pointed out that if you were to, for each of these, you might ask, if I were to make a system that sort of satisfies that definition, how do I check I've been successful? You need a test at the end. Okay, so acting humanly, the test for it is the Turing test. And we talked about Turing test, right? You understood that last time onwards, and so there's more of it, and but I don't want to talk about that. But actually, there's no real reason why acting humanly is important at all, because how humans do it is not necessarily the way it is easiest to do if you're doing it artificially. So for example, all the flight that we saw before we invented airplanes were the flight of birds. And all of them have flapping wings. Not surprisingly, the first few planes had flapping wings. If you go back into YouTube and look for pictures of old experiments with powered human flight, you will see people will actually try to flap their wings. But you really know that the big jump actually came with fixed wings. And our planes don't look at all like birds, even though birds are the natural flyers. You see what I'm saying? So that's one argument for you don't necessarily have to act human if you really wanted to make an AI system. But you may want to act human if you want to convince somebody that you're human. If you want your system to convince somebody that it's not a machine but a human. For example, in these mental health scenarios, you actually put a computer program there. You don't want them to think that they're talking to your program. You want them to think that they're talking to people. Then you'll make them act human. Like, for example, this happens in small ways all the time, right? So people call these random spam calls on your cell phones, on your landlines. Obviously most of them are recorded. And if you know when you picked up the phone that it's recorded, first of all, nobody should be picking up phone anymore. But if you picked up the phone and you can see that it's recording, you'll put down the phone. So what do people do? They will do things like, oh, wait, 1 second, I just lost my receiver, and then start talking. The whole damn thing is recorded. A small percentage of people will stay a few more seconds on the call because they really thought they're talking to a live human being. Right? So acting like humans, that's the Turing test. So those guys were using versions of the Turing test. So then, as I said, it's important what if we are writing, even though this is not the main aim of AI, not the main aim of AI, it is a useful thing if you are writing intelligent agents that interact with humans. Okay, and in fact, the deal about we talked about mental health agent programs, robotic caregivers is another interesting thing. But the Cog project actually says we anthropomorphize everything. And so if you want people to spend enormous amounts of time talking to a machine to give knowledge to it before the web, where we, on the web, we are basically putting all the things that we know for each other's consumption, and then the machines are copying it. That's what is currently happening in AI. But just before the onset of web, people thought that if you want to train a machine, you need to keep talking to it. You need to sort of train it. But who has time to talk to machines? Nobody wants to talk to machines. But evolution put a short circuit for us. We like kids. I don't know why. They're like a huge pain. But those people who thought kids were a huge pain didn't have kids, and so such people no longer exist. On the whole, that's the lovely thing about evolution, right? So the surviving characteristic is people who think kids are cute took care of their kids, and so their kids went on to have more kids. So those are the people right now existing. So we are all evolutionarily compromised to say, ah, nice little kid. Okay, and so this project called Cog Project, like 20 years back, maybe 25 years back at MIT, it's, you should look it up on the web. It looks like a bunch of, it's a robot, and it's basically is a bunch of wheels and, gears, etc. The only difference is it has something like eyes and eyebrows, and they look cute. And it just does this once in a while, makes our eyes big, makes our eyes small. And that's enough. Enough people were basically jobless enough to sit in front of this robot and talk for hours and hours and hours. Do you see what I'm saying? So evolution basically co-evolved us such that we think kids are cute, so we spend time talking to them. And all you need to do for kids to grow up to be humanly intelligent is that they have human interaction, right? And then if you wanted to do this to the machines, then basically you just have to make the machines act a little like humans, because we already fall for it after that. It's like a strange scenario. So that's something that you may want to keep in mind as to why you might be interested in acting like humans. Turing test is so big that there is even a Dilbert cartoon. This was from like 2004 or something. You can look it up later on. There's a Dilbert cartoon which basically even mentions Turing test. Another interesting thing about this whole acting like human is now, until now, you're talking about making sure that a machine is actually, how does a machine convince you that it's a human? The opposite problem is useful too. How does a human convince Yahoo that they are not a bot? Right? This is what you do all the time. Right? Basically, so the CAPTCHA project basically started this way, which is essentially showing things and asking you to write what is there, or click on that particular button in the middle, to say that, show that you are not a robot. So we are no longer talking about are you a human. We are worried that the people connecting to our service on the computer are a robot, and you want to check whether it is human or not. Okay, so captchas are essentially shibboleths. Does anybody know the word shibboleth? You guys didn't do SATs, GREs? Shibboleth essentially is a code word that if you can pronounce it correctly, then it tells you who you are. So there's a whole story about the word shibboleth would be pronounced wrongly one way by Jews and one way by Gentiles. And so they would use the pronunciation to tell whether it's a Jew or a Gentile. Okay. And so these tests are supposedly basically shibboleths to tell whether robots are human or not. And you notice this strange thing. What AI is unable to do is just as useful as what AI is able to do. Right? If you know that AI can't do certain things, they can then be used to tell AI systems apart from humans. In the beginning, for example, people used to show these kinds of things. Now it's not that hard. You can actually very easily, computer vision systems can tell that is ET76. It's not that hard. So it's like a race between AI systems, which can't do whatever the AI systems are unable to do currently can be used to tell them apart from humans. Do you see what I'm saying? That's basically what CAPTCHAs are. Okay. And so in fact, in some sense, CAPTCHAs have to become harder and harder. At some point of time, my way of thinking about it is at some point of time, they might even give you like an integration problem to tell. Actually, integration turns out to be a bad thing. It tells more whether you're a machine than a human, because most humans can't do integration. And so if you say, I don't know the answer, then you are human. Whereas if you right away say the answer, then you must be machine. Anyway, so keep that in mind, that acting like human can be connected to what you're trying to do about computers and intelligence. The other one is thinking humanly, cognitive science. I'm not quite sure why it's not showing fully. Cognitive science, that is basically the whole entire area. Cognitive science people, if they figure out how humans think, then they might help program computers in such a way that they think more like humans. But really, AI is not that interested in how humans think, even though it's a beautiful question. Okay, so figuring out what brain does, what are the problems our irrational thinking has, etc., is extremely useful. This is cognitive science, this is behavioral economics. Okay, and basically, in fact, I think there's a very funny thing about Economist. You guys know the magazine Economist? Economist basically does the following thing. It says, if you want print subscription, $180 per year. Digital, $180 per year. Print plus digital, $180 per year. Okay. And so everybody buys print for digital, $180 per year. It was a total play. They knew that if they made digital cheaper, people will just go for digital. Okay. And so they basically make, instead of saying you are paying more, they're making you think this is like a great deal for you. Okay, and people actually fall for this. Even now, if you get Economist magazine, or if you look for subscription things for Economist, it will still have this. Okay, it's the same nonsense about $4.99. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, when I came, I studied in India, I came for grad school in the US, and even now it's hard for me not to think of $4.99 as a $4 something, as against a $5 something. And so, in fact, somebody once told me, I don't know if this still happens in your elementary schools, that kids are told about how advertisements actually misuse, basically play against your own irrationalities. And so that you have to train yourself to read $4.99 as 5. And they're dependent on you reading $4.99 as 4, which I fall for. Okay, so all of that, and those are of course the small issues, but in general, how people think, what are the cognitive what are the biases, what are the holes in their thinking, all of that is connected to cognitive science. Okay, Then, of course, cognitive science, neuroscience, all of those too. So the other interesting question about cognitive science in general is, if a machine were to do something, like, for example, when machines won chess, Deep Blue won chess, people started arguing that, yes, it did, but it did by brute force. People don't play game that way. Okay, that's like saying, yes, we are flying, but we are not flapping wings. So people don't really know how to fly. For all practical purposes, we know how to fly. We buy a ticket, we get onto the plane. Okay, and similarly, for all practical purposes, actually Deep Blue can beat every chess player. But you might argue that that's not the way people actually play chess, because somehow cognitive science tells you they do it in a different way. Are people, in particular, of course, people themselves telling about how they play chess is total bogus, because we always tell a story which makes us look much smarter than we are. And so even if in fact you had to do a lot of work to find out what the right move is, normally a good story would be, and then it hit me. And then, so that's the kind of thing that people will tell. And then, that doesn't look like computers had to actually do any hard work to figure out. I mean, people didn't have to do any hard work to figure out what the right move is. They may not actually be aware of it. It could be actually happening in the system 1 and the system 2 is not conscious of it, for example. But all of that is the argument as to why cognitive science is connected to AI, but you don't need to do things the way humans do things. This was actually a question one of you asked on, I think, on Piazza. Must AI systems always use human-like approaches? No. They should just be mistaken for humans at best in some cases. It's not necessary that they have to, do things the way humans do. And secondly, we don't know how humans do many things anyway, especially for the tacit knowledge tasks. We just don't know how humans do things at all. Okay, so that's the cognitive science version. That comes then the thinking rationally. We then basically, in human civilization, we try to figure out, I know people think, but let's just figure out mathematically what's the right way to think. And it starts starting from Greeks. We looked at laws of thought, we looked at logic, we looked at probabilistic reasoning, we looked at a whole bunch of formal systems that can be analyzed, that will give you decisions, and that can be analyzed. Do you see what I'm saying? So this is where logic comes. This is where probability, probabilistic reasoning comes. Both of them are mainstays, for example, of AI. Okay, but then the last one is really acting rationally, which is eventually what you might want to ask is, I don't even need to care about how the system thinks. In some cases, I only care about the performance measure, and the performance measure is how well it is doing in the world. What is its performance? And if you showed the right performance for the wrong reasons, I don't care. If you had the right reasons for the wrong performance, I would care because the performance is bad. I mean, this is sort of like, I really understand the material, but I blanked out during the exam. Right? So performance metrics says, sorry, there's no difference that I can figure out between you who knew the answer but didn't know how to write it, and somebody who did not know the answer and didn't write it. But that's like an end level. So it's basically acting rationally. And having said all of these, it turns out that this ultimately is what the majority of AI systems look at, just acting rationally. Okay, even things like neural networks for vision, which all of you have heard of, vision or audio detection. There's like no claim that neural networks are actually detecting images the way humans detect images. There is no claim that neural networks hear the sound the way humans hear the sound. So in fact, I'll show you some examples of this at some point of time. But there is this famous example where, which I wish I could had it right here, but there's a picture of a school bus, a yellow school bus. The machine will say it's a school bus. Then I add some random noise to the school bus so that the pixels are changed slightly. So you get a new school bus that all of you will still say is a school bus because it just looks completely like a school bus. There's a couple of pixels, values have changed. Do you understand what I'm saying? And most machine learning systems, most vision systems give very high confidence to the classification that the second school bus is actually an ostrich. Ostrich, not a school bus, but an ostrich. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, I mean, actually, since maybe I should show you that just for the heck of it. I'll show it to you pretty soon. But anyway, so that sort of tells you that the only thing that's common between neural networks and brains is the prefix neural. That's about it. So neuroscience, brain, and neurons, neural networks. So we pick that part, and it's like kind of influenced in the sense that you do think in terms of connections between neurons to other neurons, but the way brain works is quite different. We don't actually know how it works, but we know it doesn't work the way neural networks work. Here is a nice little statistic that you can take, which is if in fact it is possible for the current best neural networks to be of a size, if you scale them up, if they start showing human-like behavior, it's not actually possible, it's not theoretically possible. But to get to that, you can do some back of the envelope calculations and talk about how many neurons, how many connections would be needed. And the question then would, to get to the level of brain in terms of we know how many neurons are there in the brain, how many connections are there in the brain. We know that approximately, okay? To get a neural network of that size, it doesn't necessarily even have to do what the brain does. It's just to get a neural network of that size, the power consumption of that neural network would be equal to the power consumption of New York City before COVID. After COVID, everybody left New York City, so there's no actual power consumption. But before COVID, imagine New York City power consumption. Our little brain takes 40 watts. Okay, so you still have something going for you. You don't need to be worried that much about machines. But that's again another way to tell you that the only thing that's common between neural networks and brain is the word neur. That's about the prefix neur. It's a little more influenced by what people might be doing, but really the understanding how people do something is more neuroscience. How brain works is neuroscience. And people actually say that some of the experts, and I heard this guy, Sebastian Schung, who wrote this book called Connectome, who's actually also pretty good in computer science and is a very good neuroscientist. He once said that if a neuroscience is a 1 mile trek, we have completed 3 inches, first 3 inches. This is what he said. So if you're understanding neuroscience is a 1 mile trek, we have completed first 3 inches. And that was like 4 years back. I'm pretty sure we went to 3.1 inches by now. But still, we are nowhere near understanding how brain works. So maybe it is actually sour grapes that AI says we don't need to understand how brain works. What we need to do is just act like brain. And it doesn't really matter. I mean, in fact, I might be able to support with the class, with the cloud power and so with the cloud computing and humongous power, etc. It basically may not matter that the machine is actually taking a lot more power than a human being to do the same work. So, for example, you guys know of AlphaGo, right? Which basically won over the human Go players. If you are trying to train AlphaGo on your state-of-the-art desktop, it will take 1700 years. 1700 years. Okay. Basically, they have humongous, much higher compute power. Basically, these TPUs that Google, is providing for them. And they're using that to be able to train something that will take 1700 years for your desktops in just mere weeks or months. Once again, it's not that the way AI is working right now is the way humans work. It is, some ideas are at least try to make a connection to how humans might be doing things, even if it is partially wrong. And some don't even care. They just basically say, this is the right way to do probabilistic reasoning. This is the right way to do logic. Okay, so that's the 4 ways of doing AI. Are there any questions at this point? Some of you came from different areas and there was questions as to how AI might connect to your area. For example, if there is anybody who has that kind of an issue, this might be a good time to ask. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm mechanical engineering. So how can an AI system, help with human thinking in terms of like designing systems and like let's say a plane or a rocket? How would an AI system help design?
Again, I mean, I think there are 2 very different issues. Of course, manipulation in general. I mean, mechanical engineers also are very interested in this, super fine manipulation, and that AI is nowhere close to what humans can do. That is still, there are approaches like deep reinforcement learning has been a pretty promising approach for that, for example. Design sort of things, again, it's like a search in a huge space of configurations. That's normally the way, sometimes design is posed as a problem. And so there could be, I mean, part of intelligence is ability to search through configurations, either during the training time or during the search time, test time. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So the next part that I will hopefully get this off before we are done today is the intelligent agent architecture itself. And that should answer the question of AI versus machine learning. What's the difference? Okay, so if you need a reason to listen to me, some of you wondered why, etc. So an intelligent agent, if you need a picture, think of it this way, there's a robot. This is my pink robot. It has some effectors like hands. It has some sensors like ears, touch, smell, all this stuff are sensors. Effectors are hands mostly. And of course, legs and other stuff, the way that changes our position in the environment. And this intelligent agent is interacting with a big bad environment. Environment is, the room in which the robot is in, for example. But in general, actually, one thing that you want to keep in the back of your mind is, first, we'll mostly think about single agent scenarios. Single agent means one animate or intelligent agent interacting with inanimate, essentially inanimate environment. Okay, that's the first place. In fact, if the environment has people, we'll just think of them as obstacles. Just don't bump into them, kind of a thing in the beginning. But if you really want to talk about social intelligence, etc., then you start realizing that environment with people is different from environment without people. The classic example that I have is, how many of you seen Star Wars? Right? So what is that? Death Star, right? Death Star is basically impregnable, except this little place, right? What is the chance that an inanimate environment will randomly hit Death Star in that little place? Actually, I don't know how many of you seen the Family Guy version of why Death Star was designed that way. ask me, I'll send you a YouTube clip. It's amazing. But the point is that there is this one small vulnerability, just a little vulnerability. The Family Guy says it's like an aesthetic feature for Death Star. It's stupid. Obviously, you need it so that George Lucas can get, a way of, getting Harrison Ford into Death Star. Okay, so what's the probability that an inanimate environment, like things like, lightnings, I don't know whether it's lightning on Tatooine, etc., but lightning, etc., would hit you, it would hit Death Star on that little place. Vanishingly small, 10 power minus 275. What is the probability that Harrison Ford will get you exactly there? 1.0. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's the difference between adversarial versus playing games. So you can be playing games with environment or people. Always play games with the environment. People are evil because people basically will find, it's an adversarial reasoning for people. Nature doesn't care about you. So if in fact, when you're walking, sometimes you step on the banana peel, you might fall. It's not like nature is putting a banana peel. It's not like it is trying to push you to fall down. It's just a probabilistic process. It's a stochastic process. On the other hand, I'm also there in the environment. You can be sure that I put enough number of banana peels and I did enough of pushing until you fell. Right? So there's this whole entire issue of dealing with animate people. We'll for now not think about it. Just let's say, a robot is interacting with the environment. It has effectors, it has sensors. So the question then is, it has some goals. It's a performance metric. Okay. The question then for the agent is, what should I do next? And it will do something. When it does something, the environment state changes. Then it gets more sensing information. Then it is now in a new state. It still has goals. It still tries to then do the next action to get it closer to the goal. So the simplest scenario would be some simple thing like a grid world. The robot is here. It wants to go to gold here, right? So then it might basically say, okay, I should be, and then maybe this is obstacle here. You can't walk in here. So the robot might realize the first step I should do is go this way. That's just a very, very simple agent. It makes this action. And at this point, now it is here, then I'll ask itself, what should I do next? That's AI for you, ultimately. An agent is getting a snapshot of the environment state through the sensors. It then basically is trying to use its effectors to do some things to the environment until it puts the environment in a state, or it and the environment in a state where its goals are satisfied. That is basically the metaphor for intelligent agents. And it's actually a very powerful metaphor. Everything that you have ever seen as an AI agent can be thought in terms of these. Okay. Any questions? This is basically intro to AI first lectures. So one other thing to think about is then from a mathematical point of view, an agent essentially is getting a set of percepts. Percepts means sensory information. And it basically does have a brain right here. And so it can remember what happened before, what percepts it got before. And environment, what it's doing is it's trying to map the sequence of percepts, P0, P1, blah, 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 Pn, to an action. Intelligent agency is learning this function. That's it. It's a very abstract way of thinking about, but that's what you're trying to do. Okay. Now, oh, okay. This actually, I forgot about this. In fact, I should have shown this to you, but this is useful that systems that think like humans are very useful for tutoring systems. If you have a computer which is trying to teach you how to do integration, and then it says, I got the answer, why don't you? I got the answer, why don't you? That's not going to help you, right? Much of tutoring is figuring out the kinds of errors the students are likely to do and help them avoid them. Okay, it's useful there. Systems that act like humans are very useful for teaming with humans. And as I said, this is, of course, the default position of AI systems acting rationally. Okay, this one, I don't know, is basically just to say, just like this is the other version of the cog. There is this, you guys are all too young. Have any of you ever seen Seinfeld? Okay, first of all, you're good friends. We should talk more. But, in fact, in general, I look at the world through Seinfeld like completely. And so there's this one particular time, remember Elaine, this guy, Uncle Leo loses his eyebrows. So Elaine draws these eyebrows and she draws the eyebrows in such a way that the eyebrows are raised. And so the rest of the show, everybody thinks Uncle Leo is mad at them. He's just talking, but they say, why are you so angry at us? And then they'll just start treating him pretty badly because they feel as if he's angry at them. This is as silly as it gets because we just are easily, just as big eyes means cute, raised eyebrows means angry. So what if your eyebrows get stuck in a permanently raised position, as happened to poor Uncle Leo? His performance is going to suck in the world because the rest of the people are essentially going to be thinking that he's always angry. So imagine instead of Leo, it's a robot with a raised eyebrows. It will take us a long time to figure out that the robot isn't glaring at us. Okay, so anyway, that just was wrong order, but let me show this. Actually, this, I'll come back to this. This is like going one level deeper. I will come back to it probably later, but I just want to mention that what makes intelligent agent design hard versus easy are these types of environment. So for example, if I'm doing actions, I can have deterministic actions. That means if I try to pick up this cup, I will be able to pick up this cup. Or stochastic actions where I try to pick up this cup, it might be picked up or it sometimes fall off, depending on the way I pick it up. Deterministic versus stochastic. Stochastic essentially means the outcome is a distribution of states rather than a single state. Similarly, an action may be instantaneous or it can take time. And when an action takes time, other actions might be happening while this action is going on. I don't know, actually, for some strange reason, I remember this story that at the height of social media craziness, not at the moment, in fact, one of the beginnings, this lady once got onto a flight from New York to Johannesburg, South Africa. Bear with me as to, most of my analogies don't have any connection to what I'm talking about, but it will eventually. So she's on the flight and she's going off to Johannesburg. And she basically, for some reason, she was in, maybe she had a couple of extra drinks before the flight took off. And she basically tweeted or put on the Facebook that I'm off to Johannesburg, hope I won't get AIDS or anything, and put, like fingers crossed. Did that. Obviously, once the flight goes up, there is no internet. Maybe at least she wasn't buying internet. She closed the cable, the cell phone, went off to sleep, maybe watched movies, etc. While this was going on, the rest of the world, this thing became a viral tweet or viral Facebook message. And essentially, I mean, there's this total schadenfreude in people on social media. So you want to see other people make a mistake so that we can all pile on them. And so by the time this poor woman got down in Johannesburg, which took whatever, 15 hours or something, which is an action that took time, the world did a huge number of other actions, including people finding her, employer's address and sending mails to the employer saying, you have a racist employee. This is the kind of world in general we live in, because I'm not talking about just that flight thing. In general, actions can take time versus being instantaneous. The actions that take time are harder to handle. Okay. Similarly, your perception can be perfect. You know exactly what you are seeing, or imperfect. You have bad eyesight. When you have a bad eyesight, if you have a perfect eyesight, then the percept will tell you the exact state of the environment. Currently, the state is S17. If it is imperfect, just like, if my glasses are bad, I start seeing double, right? That's what we say. Normally, we start seeing double. So in fact, if you have pretty bad eyesight, then you will wind up having many, many states that are consistent with your percepts. That means there is uncertainty. This is exactly what happens. You take a COVID test, there's a probability that, once the result comes, the result is noisy. Depending on the test, the results are noisy. And so after the COVID test, all that changed is before the COVID test, there is a prior probability that you either have coronavirus or you don't have coronavirus. After the test, unless it is a deterministic test, you don't know for sure whether you have coronavirus. If it's a cheaper test, you just have a slightly less uncertainty. That means the probability distribution is now such that one of the possibilities has a much higher probability than the other. That's what you're doing when the world is what is called partially observable. Okay, so if the perception is full or imperfect, then you are not observing the state fully, and so you will get partial observability. And then same with this side, deterministic versus stochastic. And then the environment itself can be static versus dynamic. That means static means you look at the environment basically has nothing going on in its life. You are the only guy. It's like you came onto this earth, there's nobody else, nothing is happening on earth. It's your move. Until you make a move, nothing changes in the world. The other is, even if you don't make a move, world changes. Like for example, on rural road, if you're standing in the middle of the road and you're trying to figure out what is the optimal policy to cross the road in the middle of the road for the rest of the half, it's not a good thing to do, because the world doesn't stop for you to think, because the cars are still going on even now during the COVID times. So it's a dynamic world. So it becomes harder to make the right decision because you don't have too much time to think to make a decision. So in general, in this picture, anything in yellow makes life hard for intelligent agent. The simplest intelligent agent would be dealing with, and also even for the goals, you can talk about, there are all sorts of goals. The simplest would be, I need to achieve a particular condition. That's it. I need to get an A in this course. That's it. No cost, nothing involved. I have nothing else in my life. All I need is an A in this course. You might think that's actually the easiest life, because you only have one goal. You don't need to think about having life, having other commitments, etc. You just have to work on this, and if you have the capabilities, you will get the goal. Otherwise, you fail. On the other hand, if I give you a huge number of goals that are all partially satisfiable, so do as well as possible in this course, be as nice to your friends as possible during the semester, try to get as much sleep as possible during the semester, enjoy life and during the semester. These are all mutually conflicting goals oftentimes. And you need to figure out to what degree are you going to achieve each of these goals. Do you understand what I'm saying? Right? You do this. You are intelligent agent, so you do this. You say once in a while, if my house is on fire, if my loved ones are in distress, screw this course. I hope you do this, because that's what will make you an intelligent agent. In fact, a classic joke about AI systems right now is that an AI system can make a perfect chess move when the room around it is on fire. Do you understand what I'm saying? Even Kasparov is not that stupid, right? I mean, there is like a difference between, if you are in a room playing chess and the room is on fire, the first thing is to get out of the room. You're not trying to make the perfect chess move. But AI systems basically are much harder. It basically, this ability to combine goals becomes harder in general. And you do this. You combine multiple conflicting goals. Okay, so everything in yellow makes the problem harder. Everything in whatever this color is, maybe orange, makes the problem easier. And you can make all yellow, that's real world. Okay, and you want to make life simpler and simpler, you make it orangish. Now, for example, that one way you can do this is, if you basically, one of the things humans can do is they don't put their kids on the rural road and say, fend for yourself. Little kids. Instead, they will put them in a nice crib. If they fall, they'll fall on a pillow. That's about it, until they get to a point when they're actually able to get to the rural road. And even then, huge number of parents and the grandparents will be looking to see whether the kid is okay or not, until the kid starts saying, Mom, stop doing this. And then they let the agent behave by itself in the fully hard environment. So one of the things that we do is we can make environment simpler for the agents as needed. Okay, but if you're talking about intelligent agents, those are the issues to think about. Any questions on this? This is actually, if you start understanding some of these terms, you're over, you're better than 90% of the people on the social media who talk about AI. 90%. You still are not at an A grade in computer science for AI, but you are 90% higher. So this is just sort of becoming, nobody is talking about databases on the social media, but they're talking about AI. Everybody is an expert, as I told you. So now you actually can understand what makes a problem hard versus easy. Think about Go. Think about Go. Is Go a deterministic or a stochastic action game? Think about chess. Maybe many of you don't know Go. I mean, who knows Go? I mean, is anybody from Asia here? Anybody knows Go? Yeah. Dennis, do you know Go? Good.
Yeah.
So you know. Okay, there you go. So Go is like real harder than chess. But some of you probably might know chess also. So actually chess and Go are very similar. So chess and Go, are they deterministic actions or stochastic actions?
Deterministic.
Chess definitely is deterministic. Let's just talk about chess. Chess definitely is deterministic. Unless you start taking extraneous things such as an old man or an old woman or a very bad robot trying to pick the pawn and trying to do like this and put it on a thing and doesn't know how to put it. So it actually means to put it in this square, but puts it in the other square. If you remove that aspect, chess is a deterministic game. It's a deterministic actions. Agreed? Is it a perfect or imperfect information environment? Are the sensors giving you full knowledge or partial knowledge?
Full knowledge.
What?
Full knowledge.
Full knowledge. Can you think of a board game that has partial knowledge? It doesn't give you the full sensing of the state.
Battleship?
What?
Battleship?
Battleship, I'm too old to know that.
Like Guess Who, maybe?
Poker? Let's talk about, I shouldn't have even asked these kinds of questions because A, I'm very bad at games, as I told you, and B, I don't know most of the games you know, but so we have to find the 3 or 4 games that we all know. Poker, okay. Poker is basically partial information game because you don't know the other person's cards, right? None of you played poker? I mean, that's one thing that I know at least. I mean, I don't know how to play it, but I know that the important thing is not knowing the cards, right? Okay, so poker is actually partial information. Go and chess are perfect, fully observable games. They're also deterministic. In chess, is the environment static or dynamic?
Dynamic.
What?
Dynamic.
Yes, is dynamic. Who said dynamic? Okay. Have you seen grandmaster level chess? It's only more boring. The only other game more boring than grandmaster level chess is golf. Okay. Right. Right. It's like, people are just staring at the damn board. Nothing is happening. What is dynamic about it? Actually, another more technical way of putting it is that it's a turn-taking game. So it is kind of, if you think in a serious sense, yeah, it is dynamic in the sense, if you don't make your move like at all, then you forfeit your move. And so there is that. But it's really a turn-taking game. So you can take quite a long time to come up with the next move. And nothing much is happening, which is why it's very hard to kind of, like, it's not like football, which I don't like either, but basketball, which I kind of like. They're like really dynamic. Right? I'm just going to wait to see where the ball is going to go, and then the ball is just going all over the place, changing, right? So all the interesting games that we play on the court, the ones they call sports, they're dynamic. They're partially observable, right? Because in basketball, as well as football, sometimes you don't have the full idea about where the ball is, for example. Okay, partially observable, and they are stochastic. I would love to play basketball if I throw ball action, it will just go into the hoop. Right? It's like an easy, that's what we are all been hoping for. The problem with the damn game is do hoop doesn't seem to work most of the time. You understand what I'm saying? So it sort of tells you why basketball agents are still not there. Chess agents are there. Go agents are there. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's like a harder problem because the world is dynamic, the perception is unlimited, the actions are stochastic. Okay. So this is actually, hopefully it convinces you that these things are giving you a way of figuring out what problem that you think requires intelligent behavior is hard versus easy in these qualitative terms. Do you understand that? Okay. And also actually, this is actually a very interesting thing. You can also ask yourself, one of the issues is whether the information is perfect versus imperfect depends on the agent's sensors. And whether the overall environment is observable or partially observable depends both on the environment and the sensors of the agent. So for example, if you are just walking on the road, is the road fully observable? Yeah, for most of us with reasonable eyes, it's fully observable. You know who is on the road. If on the other hand, you're blind, it's partially observable because you're essentially trying to make sense of the current state of the road based on not visual information, but things like auditory information and tactile information, etc. So then what you think, oh, the road is in state S17, whereas your blind friend is saying the road is in states S1 to S100 with some probability. So if you both cross the road, who do you think actually showed more intelligence? Your blind friend. They had to solve a much harder problem. If you try to cross the road without eyes, you would be solving a much harder problem. So this kind of gives you a very nice way of quantifying what makes tasks hard versus easy. Okay. So then, armed with this, I want to sort of show you, actually just go further away and say the following. Let's see, this one. Actually, since we only have 10 minutes, I want to at least point out the connection between intelligent agency and learning, because that's what people are asking until now, right? So what would an architecture, like a black box diagram for intelligent agent look like? This was the environment, and this whole thing is the pink robot. So if you do basically, if you cut open the pink robot's innards and figure out what's going on in its brain, what would it involve? It essentially must involve some pieces like this, could involve some pieces like this. It's getting sensory information, okay? And the sensory information allow it to figure out, based on the current sensory information, as well as its model of the world, as well as its previous experience, what the world currently is like now. Do you understand what I'm saying? Sometimes sensory information may not be able to tell you exactly what the world is, but if you put it together with the previous sensory information and model of the world, you can figure out. Now, whatever I said looked very fancy. How many of you drive? Do you know about blind spot? What is blind spot? So you looked in the rear view mirror, there's nobody. Can you just change the lane? No, because you don't actually have full knowledge of the state of the lane next to you, because there is a blind spot in the car. Now, of course, sooner or later, I can't talk about blind spots because people will have, there'll be much better cars. Already there are better cars that remove the blind spot and show you exactly what is happening around you. But if you are one of the used cars, I'm hoping you're undergrads, you can't really afford a Tesla. If you do, actually, let's have a office hours discussion. But if you actually have a cheaper car, then typically you have partial information. And you can't say, there's nobody in the next lane, let me just move in. You have to, for example, how do you realize that it's safe to move? Because here is, for example, what I do. I look, there's a car. Then I'll continue driving, and that red car passes me by. Then I look again, there is no car. At this point, I know there cannot be anything on the other lane, and so it's safe to change lanes. Do you understand what I just said? Now, to go from these observations to the decision that there is no car in the next lane, I had to use properties of the world that I live in. My model of the world is cars don't fall from the sky. In the world that I've been living in, cars don't fall from the sky. Maybe Grand Theft Auto, after the red car, you saw last time there was a red car, that red car passed by, there is no car behind you. How do you know that a green car didn't just drop into your blind spot? In my world, that doesn't happen. In my world, physics actually matters, and cars aren't dropped by cranes. And so putting 2 and 2 together, I reach the decision that it's safe for me to change the lane. So now I know the state of the world. Do you just understood what I just said? To figure out what the state of the world is, I take the observations, I combine it with the previous observations and my model of the world to really figure out what the state is. So that idea is called state estimation. Figuring out what is the current state of the world. That's a very hard problem, first. After you figure out the state, then you think, what do I want to do? I want to change the lane. So I have to imagine, if I do various actions, what would they do to my position in the environment? That's planning. Having done that, then I basically, for each of the actions, I can say, if I do this action, this will not happen, this action, this other thing will happen. And what's the best action that will increase my chance of getting to the goal? And I do that action. So that's basically where I pick that action, and then effectors tell my hands, my steering wheel to turn the steering wheel correctly, etc. Then I'm in this other lane. At this point, I now again look at my state of the world and decide what to do next. Okay, so basically these rectangles are decision problems, because this one is state estimation and this one is planning. This and this are both planning. Sorry. And this is models and knowledge plus memory. You're combining all of them to decide what to do next. That's what an intelligent agent does. I haven't talked about all this. The question is, much of this looks like inference, that is knowing what I know, what is the state I am in. The way I told you is I had an idea about how my world works. I have a memory that there was only a red car before. I have a percept now that, and I also have memory that the red car passed me by. I have a percept now saying there is no car in my rear view mirror. So I put all of these together, I compute the true state of the world and realize that there is no car, and I'm able to make lane change. Is there learning here? This overall problem is AI. This overall problem is AI. Okay? Then comes the question of where do you get these pieces of knowledge and these types of algorithms? And this knowledge in particular, some of this knowledge, such as how the world evolves. Who told you this? Well, I've lived in this world and my experience told me how the world evolves. That's learning. Okay, so in particular, actually, I can say that, in AI, if you take an intro to AI course, these boxes correspond to things like search, planning, logical reasoning, probabilistic reasoning, etc. Those are those rectangles. And this knowledge has to be represented in some language, and the representation mechanisms can be logic, probabilistic logic, or neural network weights, or whatever. Those are all the representations. The question then is, how do you get the models themselves? You have to learn them, or somebody gives them. So either the agent came into the world with some of these boxes already filled in with how the world works. And so it basically mostly is reasoning, or it basically doesn't know how to work in the world at all. So it has to keep on driving in the world, die a few times, and then learn how the world works. If you don't mind, I'm going to take 10 more minutes. Any of you who need to leave, feel free to leave. I just want to stop at a logical place because I brought this whole thing up. Okay. So, because it's going to be recorded. So if you have to leave, you can still see the recording. But I want to be done on this aspect today. So the point is that you can learn the models from experience or take the models from the human programmer. That's the learning part. So this is why I said, what is the difference between AI and machine learning is what's the difference between hand and the person. Hand is part of a person. Learning is part of being intelligent. Okay. In particular, so basically every one of these, the pieces basically, I won't show this to you, but I mean, the models here can be learned from experience. So in particular, actually, there have been, and this is the slide that I really wanted to talk about in the next 10 minutes. Within AI, if you are taking intro to AI, you would see that there have been two different ways of designing these intelligent agents. One is inference focused, one is learning focused. The inference focused one assumes the programmer kind of gave okay models for the world, okay models for the actions. Because remember that the thing that you need is not just how the world evolves, which is the way the world changes, but I also need a model for what my actions do. You know what, most of the time, what do kids do? They put everything in their mouth. What is the point of it? Because their way of understanding the world is putting everything in the mouth and seeing, whatever, that's their sensing mechanism. They're figuring out whether actions are good or bad by doing that, or everything they'll put their hand. So if you leave the child without supervision and there is a nice red, range, cooking range, they will go put their hand on it. And you can then say, hey, sorry, kid, I mean, you're supposed to be an intelligent person. You should have learned this. That's not a very reasonable thing. Instead, what we kind of do is we stabilize the environment, and until the kids actually understand natural language instructions we give them, and then we will tell them, look, that red stuff, don't touch. This red candy, fine, until you start putting on weight. Right? You basically give this kind of information for them so that they don't have to learn it from experience. You can learn everything from experience, but you can't. In fact, it's very inefficient. In particular, here is a great word to know: ergodic worlds. An ergodic world is a world where you can go from any state of the world to any other state. Is human life ergodic? No. What makes us human life non-ergodic? Death. It's very little you can do after you're dead. Okay, I mean, for those of you who probably didn't realize this, is a useful piece of information. But here's the interesting thing. When you go under the car, it's too late for you to learn that I shouldn't have probably crossed the rural street when the green light was on for the oncoming traffic. It's too late for you. But what is a problem for you is service for the human society, right? Because I noticed that you're somewhat flatter because you got under the car and you're not anywhere near as fun to be around. So I say, maybe that's not a fun thing to do. Do you see what I'm saying? One of the great things is we can learn from each other's experiences. So this is the thing. So people try to talk about this idea called reinforcement learning. After the neural networks, the other popular word you may have heard of is reinforcement learning. And what a reinforcement learning does is essentially look at the problem like this: take experience, convert it into policy. So why care about this big intelligent agent architecture? I just take the experience, I'll figure out a big function which tells me what to do when. Okay, but those, while that may be interesting at a certain level to think about it theoretically, it's a very inefficient approach for many, many scenarios where you have explicit knowledge about the world that you can tell your agent. This is the difference between tacit versus explicit knowledge. You see what I'm saying? So I can write some of these, models, these kinds of models myself into my program. Much of your programming is you telling the program the models. So you can do that for intelligent agents too, and then let them do the reasoning about what's the right action to do with computation. That's the inference part. So much of the initial work on AI has focused on inference, saying let's start by assuming that the models are available, that some sort of a state representation and action representation, like data structures that you do for computers, your programs. I can also do it for AI agents. I can talk about state representation, action representation languages. And then I'll focus on algorithms for inference in the context of these models. That is a lot of AI. And any of you who have heard of control theory? How many of you have heard of control theory? That's also control theory. They will start with like a partial model and focus mostly on learning the decision, learning the policy. Okay. Focus on the inference mostly. And then sort of you realize that not everything can be given up front. So you sort of make a weak promise, you, the AI developer, make a weak promise to yourself that one of these days I will start learning stuff. Okay, but more often than not, you're a lot more enamored with the inference part, and you learn a lot about how to do this inference, how to do state estimation problem, how to do planning, how to do those reasoning problems. That type of thing postpones learning, and it's quite reasonable for domains with good models. Chess, Sudoku, NASA mission planning. Saying, let me just try a couple of lunar missions, I'm pretty sure I'll figure out how to make rockets, is in theory kind of okay, but in practice, a dumb idea. Right? You want to start from where the humanity right now is, what their knowledge is, and start from there and go forward. So that's one way of doing. So AI development followed this direction for much of its history. And if you look at the Intro to AI textbook, I said this textbook, but you guys have no textbook. The Intro to AI textbook, Russell and Norvig, it has like 1,800 pages or 1,300 pages. Most of the book is about inference algorithms. The learning chapters all together are essentially maybe like 150 pages. So that's another way of saying, is AI bigger or learning bigger? Well, learning is fewer pages. AI is more pages on the whole, because AI includes learning. But the more interesting way of understanding is what problems are you foregrounding? What problems are you sort of putting in the back burner? So that is one idea. The other idea is learning focused. There you assume that the agent does not have any a priori models. There's nobody to tell the agent how the world works. This is particularly useful for tacit knowledge tasks where nobody knows how the world works in those cases. So it has to learn by trial and error anyway. And so there you assume that there are no a priori models. Here you focus on learning even primitive models and representations. You want to learn, your decision is to figure out whether or not the thing that you're seeing is a cat or a dog or a man. That's a decision. That's an intelligent agent. It's just that it basically is looking at one picture. It's trying to come to the decision of what the classification is. And if its classification is right, its performance will be rewarded. But turns out none of us have much of a theory about what makes something a cat versus a dog. We know how to do it, but we don't know how to tell the machine how to do it. That was the whole point of last class. So in that case, then you essentially give a gazillion pictures of cats and dogs and people with the labels and say, you figure it out. And so then it'll be ready to do this stuff. But then that's just for one shot decision. If it then needs to use it in such a way that it can do a sequential decision, one shot versus sequential decision means doing a series of decisions that gets you to a better state in the world, that improves your performance, that increases the chance that you will reach the goals. If you want to do that, then basically you still have, that is the stuff that you don't actually have done yet. So currently, so these kinds of approaches say we will focus on learning and learning either primitive models and representations, and then do at least one-shot decisions. And then they make a weak promise to themselves, saying, eventually we are going to do reasoning. Eventually we are going to do inference. So if you follow Twitter, you can almost see that some people say, one of these days AI systems will be doing reasoning, which is kind of bozo-ness if you say that this kind of AI systems, this first kind of AI systems have always only been doing reasoning. Okay, it's these guys who learn their own models. They haven't come up to the point where you can talk about doing state estimation and sequential decision making well enough, typically. Okay, so this one sort of puts the learning in the front. There is learning here too. It is just that you can start from what the humans gave upfront and improve that model. That's what you and I do. Our parents sort of, our evolution as well as our parents gave us some idea about the world. And then over experience, we figure out more. These systems, they just only go from examples and experiences and hope to recreate everything that people already know. But then they don't go farther enough in terms of sequential decision making often. So they promise to themselves that eventually they'll start doing inference, but typically that's the one they put on the back burner. So this postpones inference, reasonable for domains where there are no good models, but a lot of examples and experience generators. These are the tasks like vision, natural language, for which we do them. We don't know how do we do them.
Professor?
Yes.
So is this the difference between like supervised and unsupervised learning?
It's a lot more. No, actually, no. It's here. All of the learning stuff is on this side to some extent. It's the supervised versus unsupervised is if you give a whole bunch of pictures to the machine and just say, deal with them, that's unsupervised. If you gave a whole bunch of pictures and said, this one is a cat, this is a dog, this is a human, this is a bicycle, this is a motorcycle, etc., the labeling, then said, when I give a new picture, tell me what the category for this picture is, that is supervised learning. Unsupervised is harder than supervised. Unsupervised is what evolution did for us, in essence. You came into this world expecting certain kinds of things to be present in this world. Have you heard of the fact that when kids are born in Desert Sam, as soon as they're born, if you're standing there with like a banana and a rotten egg, and you put the banana next to the kid's nose, kid looks happy. This infant, less than hours alive outside of the womb. And you put the rotten eggs smell, they kind of make the Uncle Leo kind of a face. What the heck does a 1 hour-old kid know about banana versus eggs? Do you understand what I'm saying? There's a huge amount of literature in psychology, in neuroscience, etc., that show that, for example, kids, when they start crawling, they know the depth and they know that they're not supposed to cross over the depth. It's not because they learned it. The first time you put them, on a place where there's like a glass pane between two desks. So middle of the desks, actually, you can see the depth falling off. This is the kind of thing that you guys pay money to go to that Grand Canyon, Havasu Falls glass platform, right? You know that rationally there is no reason for us to feel worried, but we are not rational. We pay money and we'll say, oh my God, I can't go. Why the heck should kids feel this way? You guys have been, messed up because you fell a couple of times and you think that depths are to be afraid of. Why should kids feel this way? Again, these are models that some parts of these models about what makes the world around us have been built into us through evolution. And then more are learned from examples around us. So even human kids are sort of in between. Some pieces of this model are fixed, and then you start learning on top of them. But in the AI itself, either you can say, my task is such that I have pretty reasonable idea about the model of the task, and the hard part is the actual coming up with the optimal schedule, for example. So for airlines, you have tons and tons of flights. There are large numbers of cities that have to be connected to, and you're trying to figure out a timetable for the flights. The knowledge is there. Coming up with the schedule is a hard problem. That's intelligent. That typically gets done here. The final answer is both. But the question is, are you going top down or bottom up? Are you going inference focused or learning focused? And that distinction, if you can understand, you would 93% ahead of people, maybe 95% ahead of people who talk about AI, thinking they know AI. Okay, to put that in perspective, this slide, there is a international conference on planning that's going on right now. That's what the one I was talking about. In the morning today, this slide was being used by this guy called Michael Littman to tell people who are supposedly doing research in AI and are confused about the difference between reinforcement learning versus planning. This slide. So if those guys are bosses, you're already at their level now with this, just this understanding. Okay. Again, it might take a bit of probably rethinking about whatever I said, but this is the true way of understanding, is learning bigger or AI bigger? That's a nonsensical question. Is hand bigger or eye bigger? Is hand bigger or person bigger? That's not a question to ask. It doesn't mean that you always need a whole person for everything. If you just have a mechanical hand, it can swat flies. Right? It's a useful thing. So I can sell mechanical hands that swat flies. But that's not like, if your goal is to make a person, hand is just a piece. And of course, before the person is fully there, you can still use it for swatting flies and holding cups, etc., etc. But the person as a whole has this ability to see the world, figure out the state, infer what is the state, figure out what the next action should be, make that action, and figure out, basically improve their performance. That's what an intelligent agent is supposed to be. So I'll stop here. You kind of got heavy duty version of what you now can actually ask some of the questions at a level that are way better than, what people might say just by reading New York Times articles. Since it's quite late, I will stop here. I will take any questions either after this from people who stay back or on the piazza. But, thank you for the extra time. Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.